Hello, I'm Sketches.n.Scrubs. I make weekly art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This is actually the second of my gouache faces, gouache tips and darker skin tones tutorial. So if you haven't already checked out the first one, please do that. I'm going to leave a timestamp here for those of you who want to skip to particular bits. To give a bit of context, at Stormy_artistry and I did an Instagram challenge called Gouache Faces, where we decided to paint 30 faces for 30 days. And this is one of the portraits that I ended up doing, and I learned so much, so I hope that you learn from it too. To start off, in terms of the materials that you'll need, so you need a pencil and some watercolor paper, and the reason that I recommend that is because it tends to be able to better tolerate layers of gouache and not break away. You'll need some gouache paint, and I used a Hima Mia gouache. And then you'll also need some water in a cup and some paintbrushes. I used 3, so a flat or bright brush for the skin because it's good for blending, a big round brush for the hair, and a small round brush for extra fine details on the face. So let's spend 30 seconds just recapping on colours so that you can take part in this tutorial with me as well. So darker skin tones are mainly made of 4 colours: earth yellow, aka yellow ochre, ochre, aka burnt sienna, burnt umber or cobalt blue. The colours are kind of laid out in a scale, starting from the bottom with the darkest areas to the mid-tones to the lightest areas. And depending on the person's skin tone, that will determine how much you mix and exactly what part of the range you go towards. So for this portrait, I used a bit of cobalt blue and burnt umber to make the darkest areas, burnt umber and ochre to make the midtones, and then mainly ochre and a tiny bit of yellow to make the lightest areas. And that's a basic intro into mixing colours for darker skin tones. So 2 tips right before we start painting. First is to use your sketch as a key, and second is to take a picture of your sketch so that you can keep track of what you're doing as you paint. So to start things off, I like to put a base layer, so a light wash of gouache. It tends to be red or golden. It's kind of like what makeup artists tend to talk about our under skin color. Then I start doing the darkest areas in the face, so mixing the cobalt blue with the burnt umber. And I'm using the flat brush, but also making sure that I put more paint and less water than I did with the base layer. And I work my way through by adding the mid-tones and then the lightest areas. Now I'm going to switch to finer details, so I'm going to use the small round brush to fill in the eyebrows with a light brown, and I didn't do that before because I didn't want to lose track of where they were in the face. And then to also just darken those shadows, so those areas in the face under the cheekbones, and to paint the lips as well. I also then mix a cream to paint the palms of her fingers that can be seen, which brings back memories to someone that I know who didn't realize that black people had light colored palms until they met me, which was odd. But anyway, to do the hair, you use the big round brush and you almost do like a dabbing kind of motion, and you don't want to just do like a block color because afro hair, you know, it's beautiful and it has like a lot of texture to it, which you can get by doing the dabbing. Sometimes if you paint wet gouache next to wet gouache, it can bleed into each other, which is what's happening there. And the way to fix it is to wait for it to be completely dry and then go over it again with that gouache. That is the reason why sometimes it's better to plan where exactly you're going to paint. So sometimes I go back and forth just because certain areas are still wet and need to dry. And gouache is very forgiving in the sense that you can just wait for something to dry and paint over it, and it's quite opaque, so it will cover it. So again, still using the small brush to add in extra details, to darken the shadows, to blend the edge of the hair, and to fill in the eyebrows and the eyelashes, making sure that they're individual curved strokes. Another thing to remember with gouache is that darker colours dry lighter and lighter colours dry darker. So it may be that once the gouache has dried, you realise that actually you want to make certain areas lighter or certain areas darker. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more videos like this. My last step is always to add some white highlight. So I use a Posca pen, but you can also use white gouache. Before I end this video, I just wanted to go through some top tips for gouache. So the first one is to use watercolour paper, and that's so that you can layer. Second is to use your sketch as a key and to take a picture of it so you don't lose track. Use a bright or a flat brush for the skin because it's really good for blending. Remember that dark colours dry lighter and light colours dry darker. So sometimes it's better to mix more than you think you'll need. Because it's hard to recreate the colours. What you have on the palette is not what will end up being on the painting. 5 is that skin tones essentially comprise of cobalt blue, burnt umber, ochre, earth yellow, plus white depending on the person's skin tone. The base layer should be the thinnest, i.e. most amount of water, least paint, and then it should progressively get thicker as you build up the layers. Take a step back to look at the bigger picture to make sure that you're not missing something, and as always, just keep practicing. And that completes our second gouache faces or second gouache portrait tutorial. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you found it useful and learned a few things. Please remember to subscribe so that you can catch other art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs. And if you did paint along with me, feel free to show me on Instagram at Sketches.n.Scrubs. Thank you so much.